really what the other side of the coin is, how is that feeding into the manufacturing process? And that's what we're going to talk about next. Please welcome to the stage my next panel, Ayre, Dr. Sara Ridley, David Johnson and Stefan Crets. And while they're coming onto the stage, there's a short video, as per usual. Thank you.
UK manufacturers are more than ready for well thought out environmental regulation. But to get the results we need, there has to be a genuine partnership between the government, business and consumers.
If we're serious about reducing the carbon footprint of the industry, we need to find innovative ways to reuse EV batteries time and time again, and not just for automotive.
We at Drive Sustainability, an automotive partnership between 11 OEMs, know that the key to overcome these challenges is the collaboration, is to work together within the sector, with the suppliers together, but also with other sectors in order to overcome these challenges.
It's imperative that businesses get help to tackle the increasing regulation in this area. The timings for proposed implementation in many cases are tight and coming at a time when price increases are at an all-time high as a result of global events.
So welcome to this, my next panel. Let's just try and set the scene a bit, because clearly we all understand the desire for a sustainable automotive manufacturing base. What does that mean in reality? Stefan, if I can talk to you, if you can just set out what exactly it is your organisation does and just say, okay, where are we at the moment? How are people working together? What are they doing? Are they being sustainable?
Yeah, that's a hard question already to start with.
How long have we got?
First of all, I will apologize for my European English that I bring in on this stage in the SMMT, and thank you for the invitation. Well, sustainability is the name of the game, all around. Emissions is the name of the game, circularity is the name of the game. Everyone has to do, everyone wants to do, we heard it also in the previous panel. The direction is set and the what is clear, I think. The difficulty is in the how. How do you translate it? How do you do as an individual OEM or an individual truck maker? How do you deal with that? How do you live up to that promise that is there in the, how do you adapt your vehicles, but also how do you change supply chain? How do you make sure that supply chain is sustainable, etc. So it's the how that is very challenging. And the organization, so I'm from CSR Europe, which is Sustainability Network, but one of the things we do is we facilitate 11 car and truck makers, basically, at the global scale, working together on the supply chain sustainability, starting from the compliance of the tier 1 suppliers on everything, so the questionnaire, unpopular thing. But it moved now in a more strategic direction. How can they collaborate on, for example, more sustainable raw materials for the battery? Big challenge. They understand you cannot do that alone. Cobalt in Congo, good luck to make it sustainable. Rubber, sustainable natural rubber, good luck to do it alone as a car manufacturer. So how do they start? What we do with them is bring them together and see what kind of practical action they can do to advance on that agenda, also, for example, engaging with the tire sector, engaging in Congo on cobalt, etc. That is, the how is difficult, but collaboration helps, we think.
Well, you mentioned the tyre sector. You're sitting next to somebody from the tyre sector. What are you doing to try and increase the chances of this sort of sustainable outcome for the tyre manufacturing business?
Well, I think progress has been made pretty well already. I think if you look at I'm reasonably confident that business is up for the challenge. I say that for 3 reasons. I think if you look at the tyre industry, over the last 20 years, tyres have become 20% more fuel efficient. And when you consider that 1 tank in 5 in a car is actually used just overcoming the rolling resistance of a tyre, that's significant. Those tyres are using less material, they're lasting for longer, and they are, with every iteration, they have more and more renewable materials in them. Secondly, I think the commitments of not just of us, but the wider automotive industry as well. We've signed up to Race to Zero. We've committed by 2030 to have at least 40% sustainable materials in all our tyres. We will reduce manufacturing CO2 by 50% by 2030, and by 2050, it's a long way in the distance, or is it? But that's 100% sustainability in terms of renewable tyres and 100% carbon neutrality in supply chain. But I think the real day-to-day, yes, we're facing the challenges, is the desirability, is the desire we have to talk to government now about the raft of things that are coming. I mean, just for the tyre industry, we've got extended producer responsibility. We've got increased product standards on fuel efficiency, increased product standards on durability, and we're willing to engage, and we need to engage to make sure we get proper legislation. So I think industry in general is up for the challenge. Yeah.
I mean, Laura, in your role at Pinsent Mason, I know that you're lead on climate and sustainability. Are you seeing success stories that you can share with us? Let's start with the positives.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we've heard, everyone here will know about the gigafactories, the nearshoring that's taking place, the development R&D in terms of moving towards this potential solid-state battery to do away with the issues of, the cobalt coming from the Congo and other, frankly, conflict minerals that we don't really want to be associated with. Equally, we're seeing more and more from a contractual sense being asked to contractualise with supply chains their carbon reduction commitments. So we are seeing more and more OEMs, tier one suppliers across the board coming to say, how are we going to actually implement this? Coming back to the how are we going to make this actually happen in practice? And so what we're increasingly seeing there is the challenge between, are we going to be draconian and impose these rules on our supply chain, which frankly, well, we've all heard about the aftermath of COVID, Brexit, semiconductor shortage, you name it, war in Ukraine, we've heard it all. It's not really that everyone has in their back pocket financing just to turn their hand to change the way they're going to work. And so what we're trying to see is the focus on collaboration across the supply chain to make sure these things are manageable. Speaking to sustainability head at DHL, who's saying, we're constantly asked, can you make sure your EV fleet is 50% of all our supplies by a certain time? And that, well, the route to this place, there is no infrastructure on the way, so how on earth are we going to do it? So it's taking those practical measures. But that is a real success story. We are seeing lots being done. The fact that people are coming actually now to lawyers to ask questions how to actually implement this is a good thing. The planning, the construction of gigafactories is all extremely great. I think what we are seeing there is this silo working, which is not really helping the real progression, because OEMs, tier ones will have, for example, dedicated resource, heads of sustainability, but as you move further down the supply chain, they just simply don't have the resources, and therefore they need more working groups, they need more engagement across the sector to bring everyone along. We talk about competitiveness in the market, but this shouldn't really be a competition. Everyone needs to be working towards the same goal. So that's kind of where we play our role in trying to help people see the wider picture and bring everyone along. And I guess in other industries, perhaps they are a bit further ahead, but let's face it, they are perhaps less complicated. In the retail sector, we've got the likes of Tesco incentivising suppliers and driving through investment. They're, the plastics initiatives, etc. They are, and similarly in the clothing industry, it's easier to source T-shirts for £20 more, knowing they're sustainable. Is completely different putting on a 20 grand ticket to get an EV instead. So there's much more challenge, and it is arguably a lot more complicated in obviously the automotive sector.
So I'm sure we'll talk more about the regulatory structure which might motivate or incentivise people or force people to do that. But let's also talk about the inventive solutions, because Sarah, that's what you're all about at Autocraft Solutions. Tell us where we're at with the innovations around for remanufacturing and reuse and repair.
Certainly in terms of our internal combustion engine remanufacturing, which is sort of our base business, realistically, we worked an awful lot with augmented reality. So we have developed augmented reality to the point where we are able to upskill our employees using it. So we are able to provide live data to all of our customers via a cloud. So you can actually see any individual engine or component by serial number, where it's serialized, and you can see all of the data around it, whether that be test data, torque data, how many times it's been remanufactured, because things can have multiple lives. End of life is a really difficult concept. And we've been able to push that into our EV area. And what that's enabled us to be able to do is to develop safe systems of work. So we've invested heavily in upskilling our workforce, from engineering team all the way down to our operators, so that we can actually repair, remanufacture EV batteries safely, because that's the really big thing for us. But it's actually changed the market. Remanufacturing is a volume process. It relies on lots of core coming back. And we've already talked this morning about the difficulty about getting things across borders, so I won't go again. But realistically, core is a problem. But also, because it's quite a new and emerging sector, there isn't a huge amount of core. And so getting it here when it's classified as dangerous goods is very difficult. And if it's classified as waste, that makes it even more costly and difficult. So we are having to go out to where the remanufacturing needs to be done. So we're developing mobile solutions to go out and repair and replace for EV batteries so that we can actually go to where the need is, because that's really important now.
So interesting. I mean, are you confident that we're getting to a point where you're going to be able to say, yes, it really is a genuinely sustainable solution, as opposed to a, yes, it's good on carbon emissions, but a bit dodgy in other respects?
I think so. I think it's, with all these things, life cycle analysis developed time and time again. Typically, because we are already remanufacturing EV packs for OEMs, when we remanufacture it, we use around about 1% of the water that you would typically see. And we use less than 2% of the energy that typically is used to remanufacture. They sound like really low numbers, and I've put an awful lot of effort into calculating to make sure they really are true. But if you think about mining a ton of lithium, that takes nearly 2 million litres of water. And that's roughly, if you say work on a 60 kilowatt pack, that's what, 136 vehicles? That's not very much. So the more we use them, the more times we can keep them going. And I think that leads on to the other thing, which is, where do you go with the OEM's responsibility? And I think we'll touch probably on that later. But we need to understand where their responsibility ends and where we can start using the packs that are too degraded to use for OEM and for automotive. And what can we do with them? Can we perhaps solve the problem of what do we do to charge a fleet of trucks that we were talking about earlier? Because you can trickle charge a power bank made with old EV batteries and then use that to charge. Less demand on the national grid that way. So there's lots we can do.
Really interesting. I mean, Stefan, is this a familiar tale from the members of your organisation? Is this the sort of work that they're doing as well?
Yeah, so they are looking into that together. Although I must say we work mainly with procurement people, and there the element of circularity did not enter that much yet. It's still more in the design, R&D, production and product engineering part, not so much to our regret, or maybe that's the current stage, that in procurement this is not yet a big topic, the element of circularity, only in terms of raw materials use, but then it's more about the sustainability of the raw material. But we see that this is evolving also with CSR Europe. Doing a similar thing and there is a speaker later from Airbus on composite materials, and that reflects very well sustainability, the how dilemmas. Composite materials, you know very well, are also in the automotive sector attractive in a way for lightweighting, for emissions, but terrible from a recyclability point of view up till now. How can you overcome the challenge of not valuing actually more the raw material that gets into a composite material? Because then you could recycle it more, then you could use it more in the automotive sector. So we also have a platform between automotive and aerospace and defense looking into that specifically. And that is what is needed. There are interesting solutions individually, and then they bump into kind of, there is no market for certain materials. The only way to do it is to downgrade the value of the material instead of reusing it in the same product or in the same car or in the same truck, etc. To overcome those, you need to sit together and trust each other enough, and it's pre-competitive. A lot is pre-competitive on it, and you need a government that is willing to look also into these issues and challenges. For example, your cross-border issue, very well known as well. How can we transport waste, or is it not waste, etc. And that lacks still that kind of link between what those collaboration efforts are doing and saying, and what then the government legislation or regulations are about. That's a big challenge, I think, for the moment. Yeah.
I do want to get onto regulation for sure, but before then, I'd love to know a little bit more about what Michelin's doing in terms of the re-engineering, the remanufacturing and so on. You touched on the fact that there were some renewable elements now to the tyres that you're making. I mean, is that the direction that you as a company are going in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and not just us, the whole tyre industry. They're using things like materials derived from dandelions, from rice husks, recycled PET, that sort of thing.
I can't let dandelions just go there. So what are you doing with dandelions?
I knew you'd. It's not us that does it. I haven't got a clue.
Sounds great.
So there's lots of sort of advances going on like that. But I'd absolutely agree with Sarah that you know, the end of life issue is really critical for us. Pyrolysis is a technique that is going to be quite useful for us. This allows us to sort of reprocess tyres, recover carbon black, and those go back into tyres, actually into the same product itself. But we do have sort of issues because of end of life doing that in the UK successfully. But I'm optimistic that will come. So yeah, absolutely. I think at the Goodwood Festival of Speed we unveiled a tyre that is a motorsport tyre that's actually 53%, I think now, sustainable materials. So either recycled or biosourced. And that's with every iteration that's going up.
I mean, Sarah, do you feel that there's the data around to understand where, as we were saying, you know, you're going for low emissions versus sustainable or recycled materials, and what the kind of the pros and cons of both are?
No, we're gathering the data. I
Yeah.
think it's fair to say we are quite early in the journey.
Yeah.
And it is about gathering the data. We fill out your questionnaires on life cycle and on our carbon emissions and things like that, because it's a really useful benchmark for us as well to understand. I think there are undoubted savings. It's really how far they go and when they stop becoming savings. And I think that's where the pinch point is, and that's what we don't understand yet. We've run probably now about 2 million cycles on different batteries of charging and discharging to understand the behaviour of different cells, to understand the behaviour of the models, how they work together, to try and give us the data so that we are getting much closer and we're much more accurately able to predict when individual cells and modules will fail, so that we can understand the value of replacing them, and it may be that it's worth holding on and not replacing one until there are two that need to be replaced, things like that. But we are still very data hungry.
And so, Laura, do you think we are going to enter into a phase where this sort of behaviour is going to be imposed upon the manufacturing industry?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. We're in a space now where, you know, the draft EU regulation, battery regulation, is coming fast down the track. Clearly, post-Brexit, it's not going to have direct effect here in the UK, but coming back to the points raised by Siobhan from Borgwarner, we need that alignment, don't we, across Europe as well, to make sure the UK aren't left behind, seen as kind of second-class citizen when it comes to quality standards. And so, you know, it's a real hot topic. We've been running sessions with OEMs, getting to grips with understanding what that battery regulation is going to look like, and it's extensive. It permeates all parts of their business, from the technical teams, procurement teams, legal, and actually, really interestingly, people sitting up and listening, because senior management are also heavily targeted, frankly, in this regulation piece. You know, I won't bore you, but Article 39, I can't help, I'm a bit of a legal geek when it comes to these things, but that's all about the due diligence, supply due diligence, and requirements to tie in with OECD guidance. But here, it's not only you need to implement your strategy, you need to publicise that, not just internally in your business, which frankly is a challenge at the moment for most businesses. It's also, it needs to be publicly available. You need to have grievance procedures in place. You need to have audit mechanisms that can be tested and challenged, and certainly within the EU by the Commission itself. There are real potential implications for failure to comply. And so from a senior management perspective, this needs to be high up on the agenda in terms of making sure that the information is out with the teams, and that everyone's buying into the process, and that, you know, that will, given the cross-border nature of the industry, they need to be understanding, okay, just because we're sat here in the UK, headquartered in the UK, this isn't affected, it absolutely will. And I think the battery regulation is a big piece, it will be affecting everybody.
I'm trying to read your expression, Sarah. How do you feel this ought to be implemented?
No, I mean, I do actually agree with a lot of it. I think we need to actually have that oversight, because at the moment I don't believe we have it. I think the difficulty as a remanufacturer is it's not in your gift. So a lot of the things that we do are directed supply, so we are told where to buy the parts from. Where we have some independence, then that will be a challenge for us to put that in, because that will require extra infrastructure for us. I think it can be done. I think that the problem that we have at the moment is we've got lots of unanswered questions about just the nitty-gritty of how we do day-to-day business, even in terms of internal combustion engines post-Brexit, I'm afraid, sorry, the B word, that I don't see becoming becoming simplified just because of EV. I can't see how we're going to do that, unfortunately.
In terms of legislative structure and regulation, David, how's that affecting Michelin at the moment? I mean, you're in the public affairs sort of space yourself. I mean, you must be all over this. Are you finding it a great constraint or something that is a practical and sensible way forward?
If it's good regulation, then it's a sensible way forward. If that's done in partnership with business, then it's a sensible way forward. Regulation, I also think, is a great way to affect consumer behaviour, because we do need consumers to behave differently, but it's difficult to do that, you know. So policy can do that, and companies' marketing budgets can do that. But in general, I think we're embracing the regulation that comes, and we're just calling for joined-up government so that it can be developed in partnership with business. I mean, as I mentioned, extended producer responsibility for the tyre industry coming. There's also natural rubber deforestation due diligence coming. And some of the really, really complex issues that don't just affect one thing. They interlink with so many other things. So I would say it's complex, and over the next 3 years it's going to get really, really complex. But if it's done right, the opportunities are huge, I think, for UK.
Yeah. Stefan, what kind of legislation and incentives would you be calling for to have the best sustainable outcomes?
It's a regulation that engages. What we see now, especially from a European Union perspective, there's a lot of regulation on different elements coming out. And the direction with the Green Deal, we call it an avalanche of regulation. And as an OEM or as in the auto industry, you all have to absorb that and you have to work on it. One part helps on strategic direction setting, be it on emission regulation, etc. The other part, the risk of it is it becomes too much compliance, check the box, not productive, not adding to the situation of the people they want to help or the environment they want to help, but just creating a kind of tick-the-box exercise and an overly transparency requirement that no one reads, basically. So and one of the elements that we set on the European Commission, for example, due diligence law was, and where are the accompanying measures? What are you going to do in order to support companies to make their supply chains more sustainable, to make rubber farmers helping to make more sustainable production, cobalt? Where are you engaging with your development aid, with your trade agreements, etc.? You cannot just push it to the companies, and that's, I think, the big risk, because that is still, that hinges on, I think, that the regulators also need to engage on the topics they want to change, on the situation they want to change, and not push it to an individual company, which is now what we see happening. So there's a big risk there, we think.
Let me open this out to you in the audience. Do you have any questions on this massive topic for the panel? Any hands leaping up? Yes, gentleman here in the middle, if you just want to wait for the microphone.
Hello, Lloyd Bonson from LEVC. We heard Daniel Lee earlier on talk about battery swapping technology, and this is a question for both Stefan and Sara. How do you see that impacting on sustainability, that type of technology, but also in the remanufacturing market?
You sure?
Yeah.
I think for remanufacturing, actually, it's a real opportunity. So we've had to develop some testing. Realistically, we should get batteries back to us at end of life without any charge or with a very minimal charge. We get them in all states from fully charged all the way down to virtually nothing. So we've had to develop a lot of technology to test them, to understand what state they're in. And I think in terms of battery swapping technology, there's a real opportunity there that we can enable the service centres that are doing the battery swapping out to actually grade their packs to say this is suitable for another 1, 2, 3 EV lives, it's suitable for another application, or actually it needs to go and be recycled. And I think we can really help with that. So I think it's a big opportunity.
Stefan?
Yeah, I think from a pure sustainability point of view, in terms of reuse of raw materials, I think it's a very good direction. Of course, you have then to make the business model work on it, because how to make it profitable to do it, that is a big challenge. And that starts then from the design phase. And something that looks very challenging in the design phase or very costly in the design phase might then yield profits only after a number of years. And that's difficult decisions to take. I noticed that in the World Economic Forum and the World Business Council, they are discussing actually that at this moment in, what is it, a circular car initiative. So in principle, that's with a lot of things of sustainability. In principle, it looks promising from one perspective, for example, raw materials use. From another perspective, it becomes more challenging. And how to set up then that economy around it. And again, that requires, I keep on hammering on the same nail, you need to collaborate on that. You need to sit together and say, how do we structure, because it's a restructuring of an automotive market that has been working in a different way in the past X years, and that will have to work in a different way in the coming X years. So.
I mean, you've got 11 members of your organisation, big members. Do you feel that generally the automotive industry, I mean, and this is a question for all of you really, do you feel they are willing to work together on this? Really?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, confidently I say that. And yes, we started this 10, 11 years ago. It took 2 years' time, I can say that now, it's long enough. It took them 2 years to agree on a set of common guiding principles, which was not that high level either, but 2 years. Why? Because they needed to start building the trust and looking at each other and trying to align. Then it took them a year to make this common questionnaire that, and the tier 1 suppliers were asking, yeah, you are 11, with all 11 questionnaires, make one. It took them a year. It took them only 6 months then to decide on the data platform, and so it speeds up the lead time on everything. And now they have a common strategy on where circularity features, where people upskilling features, where all these elements of features. So I'm confident on that. It took some time, but now the lead times and everything is shorter.
I mean, I would probably echo that as well. I think there is more collaboration going on now. I think we're sort of collaborating with our competitors on deforestation, mitigating those risks, and we're being a lot more transparent, I think, with people looking into, you know, particulates, tyre and roadwear particles, that sort of thing. And it's you know, it's long overdue, but it is happening, I think, in my experience.
Yeah.
I mean, I think certainly the collaboration in terms of trying to get to grips with the regulations, where frankly the detail is just not there for people. So the extent to which there's lobbying activities going on between the OEMs, there's, you know, the likes of SMMT trying to bring people together to challenge and make sure that, you know, the UK doesn't get left behind and that there are something that's implemented. You know, our battery regulation at the moment is extremely old. It needs to be updated so that we're in line with the EU going forward. And I think in that sense, leaving aside competitiveness around actual technologies and the detail on those areas, I think where it comes to regulation, that's a definite space where everyone's just wants to get to grips with what on earth is going on.
Sure. Another question. Gentlemen, oh, just in the front here.
A question for Laura. To date, the regulations and the penalties for regulations in the CSR area, sustainability area, have been relatively soft, is my impression. Do you see it going the way of competition law and maybe data protection law, where regulators are appointed and by government and they're given teeth to actually go after people?
It's a tricky one. I think we're a long way off that, I'll be honest. I think that the industry simply isn't there to enable that to happen, as frankly everyone will be landing with penalties. I think the big drive will be consumer-driven requirements to make sure that where consumer choices want to make sure that they've got the most sustainable model out there. That will be, I think, the biggest driver in my experience, will be the thing that really dictates where people are going. The reality is if you're not on board and you're not in the right space, particularly less so perhaps as an OEM, but particularly in the tiers of supplying, you're going to get left behind. You're not going to meet the questionnaire requirements. You're going to get shifted out way before you're in, you know, part of the supply chain, and you'll be kicked out of process. So that will be the main drive from my perspective. If things really aren't getting done in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, then we may see change in that front. But I think we're a long way off that position at the moment.
We have time for one more question. Sorry, this light is right in my eyes. No? Well, listen, I think it's time then for us to thank our panel very much for a really interesting discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you.